opposite banks of a small lake stood two generals, clad in leather armor and metal helmets. They waved their war fans and shouted the command, "Attack!" Two armies of mounted troops plunged into the lake and charged. Chamberlain Sano Ichiro rode at the forefront of his yelling, whooping comrades. Water splashed his armor as his horse galloped toward the onrushing enemy legion. He and his army drew their swords, while their mounts swam into the deep middle of the lake. The opposition met them, swords waving, lances aimed. On shore, the generals barked orders to stay in ranks, but in the lake, it was utter chaos. Soldiers hacked wildly at one another, with their swords and lances. The noise of wooden weapons battering armor and metal deafened Sano. As he fought, he sat in his saddle waist-deep in water that was filthy with mud and manure. His army's mounts buffeted his horse, rammed his legs. Sano thanked the gods for iron shin guards. He swatted his opponent, knocking the man off his mount. A rider armed with a lance charged at Sano. Sano whacked the lance with his sword. Unbalanced, the rider toppled into the lake. Cheers and applause resounded. The audience was crowded in stands alongside the artificial lake and leaning out of windows in the covered corridors that topped the walls which enclosed the Edo Castle martial arts practice grounds. Spectators laughed as they egged on the armies, enjoying the tournament. But Sano and everyone else who competed in them knew that these tournaments were almost as dangerous as real battles. Somebody always got hurt. Sometimes players were killed. Audiences enjoyed that the best. It was the most exciting part of the game. The lake grew crowded with men who'd fallen in. They frantically swam, trying to avoid being kicked or crushed by the horses. Fighters howled in genuine pain from the blows dealt by the blunt yet heavy wooden weapons. Sano took a whack on his shoulder and knew he'd have a big bruise tomorrow. As he parried his opponent's strikes, he thought that perhaps, at his age of 43 years, he was too old for tournaments, but it was his duty to participate for as long as he could. "Stop!" cried a shrill, reedy voice. The battle suddenly halted. Men reined in their horses and froze, as if turned to stone. Sano sat with his sword crossed against his opponent's. In the lake, men treaded water. Blades hovered, suspended in the act of striking. "Hold that pose!" the shogun called from inside a pavilion that stood on a rise near one end of the lake. Thunder grumbled, and a drizzly rain began to fall from the misty gray summer sky, but nobody dared move. Tokugawa Tsunayoshi, the supreme dictator of Japan, knelt at a table spread with paper, inkstones, and jars that held brushes and water. He wore a smock over his silk robes and the cylindrical black cap of his rank. He squinted at the battle scene, then sketched rapidly with his brush. An admirer of all forms of art, he dabbled in painting, and equestrian scenes were among his favorite subjects. Sano had seen his work and thought it not bad. Certainly better than his leadership over Japan. "That's enough," the shogun called. "Continue." The battle resumed with increased gusto. Soldiers swung, blades whacked, more riders fell. Sano fought with less care for martial arts technique than determination to avoid a ludicrous accidental death. He had to admit the tournaments were rather fun, in addition to serving purposes even more important than entertaining his lord. Edo, the capital of the Tokugawa regime, was a city populated by more than 1 million people, some 100,000 of them samurai. That equaled too many armed men with not enough to do during a peacetime that had lasted almost a century with only minor interruptions. There hadn't been a battle since Lord Matsudaira had defeated his rival, Yanagisawa Yoshiyasu, 7 years ago. A conflict had then flared up between Lord Matsudaira and Sano, but had ended with Lord Matsudaira's ritual suicide last spring. Now the troops were restless. Tournaments not only occupied the samurai class and offered it a chance to improve